Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take your sources and pull out the most interesting insights. Today, we're taking a pretty fascinating trip, actually, back to the 19th century.
Yep.
It feels like a completely different world, but we're looking at something that feels surprisingly relevant now. It's the incredible power of personal connections, deep ones, and specifically how they were built and maintained through, believe it or not, handwritten letters. Think about it, these really private, intimate acts. They didn't just shape your personal life. They actually, you know, determined your standing in society, your influence.
That's absolutely right. We're diving into something that scholars sometimes call political friendship from that time. But that name can be a bit misleading, maybe. It wasn't just about like strategy or networking like we think of it today. Not really. It was about genuinely deep personal bonds. And they were cultivated with real intention, real care. So, yeah, we're going to explore how these really close relationships, often kept alive through detailed letters, became the actual foundation for, well, for social status and personal sway.
Okay, so let's try and unpack this for you. Our mission today really is to get our heads around how these personal relationships, and especially the whole art of letter writing, how central that was to your social position back then. You want to see how people cultivated these deep, really lasting bonds, not just for, practical reasons, but in their personal lives, how it was all woven together.
Exactly. So, in the 19th century, especially in that period leading up to the mid-century upheavals, the word friendship itself, it just carried a lot more weight than it often does for us. It was a really broad term covering all sorts of deep personal relations. And these connections, they weren't just like incidental things that happened. They were a fundamental structure, a framework for sharing your deepest thoughts, your feelings, even opinions that might have been risky to share otherwise. They were kind of like chosen families, intellectual soulmates almost.
Hmm. It's genuinely difficult for us to imagine that today, isn't it? We
Yeah.
live in this world of, instant contact connections that can feel, well, pretty fleeting sometimes. But this source, it really drives home this incredible level of commitment where these personal ties weren't just a bonus, they were absolutely core to who you were and where you fit in. Quality over quantity, definitely.
Absolutely. And you have to remember the background here. The Enlightenment had done a lot of groundwork. It fostered what the source calls a sentimental culture, especially among the educated classes in Europe. Think of it like a cultural shift where valuing and expressing authentic emotion became, well, it became a sign of being truly cultivated, a refined person.
So being emotionally open wasn't just personal, it was almost a social marker.
Precisely. It was seen as key to forming meaningful relationships that went beyond just your social status or your class. It showed you had depth, that you could connect on a, well, on a deeper human level.
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting for me. How do these deep bonds actually start? It wasn't just happening in formal settings or, through business dealings.
No, not primarily. The source points to places like salons, reading circles, debate clubs, mostly in upper class circles, it's true.
Can you paint a bit more of a picture? What were these like?
Well, imagine a salon, not stuffy, but a lively living room, buzzing with talk about books, ideas, politics. Or reading circles where people would gather, read something new together, really discuss it, share feelings about it. They were intimate spaces designed for that kind of exchange, both intellectual and emotional. And the intention behind it was quite serious. People genuinely thought that by nurturing these connections between, enlightened individuals, they could actually build a better public space, a public sphere.
Public sphere, what did that mean to them? It sounds less like a place and more like an idea.
Exactly. It was basically this idea of an open, informal space for discussion and debate, where people could shape public opinion, influence society, kind of outside the official structures. And it was driven by this really powerful idea that we think with our friends, and that the emotional connections, the trust between people, actually underpin how society worked, even politically.
Wow.
So personal friendships weren't separate from public life. They were seen as the very building blocks of influence and understanding.
That's such a key difference from how we often see things now. Okay, so if these friendships were so vital, shaping their whole world, how on earth did they keep them going across huge distances? I mean, no phones, no email, no quick chats. It must have been incredibly challenging to sustain that kind of depth.
And this is where the handwritten letter just becomes absolutely central. It's almost its own art form, its own genre, as the source says. Personal letters specifically, they really encouraged, even demanded emotional reflection, declamation even.
Acclamation, like really pouring your heart out.
Yeah, expressing feelings quite deliberately and fully. Think about the act itself. Sitting down, choosing words carefully, writing them out, then waiting, maybe weeks, maybe months, for a reply. That whole process fosters a completely different kind of emotional engagement, a different kind of intimacy. So this slow, deliberate communication, it was literally indispensable for keeping those distant connections alive. It wasn't just about news, it was about presence, feeling.
We get such a great window into this from Charlotte Dunker. She wrote about it beautifully.
Hmm.
She recalled how the lively exchange of thoughts and words with friends back home wasn't just about, politics or big events. She stressed that all of the roots of love and community were fed through this intimate correspondence, and visits, of course, when possible. So these letters were like lifelines, right? Carrying emotional nourishment, keeping those deep bonds strong across the miles.
Absolutely. They were far from just transactional notes. The emotional wick they carried drew on this popular idea of the time, this sentimentalist notion of a union of souls.
A union of souls. That sounds intense.
It was. It was a common ideal among the educated classes, men and women alike. Friendships were often seen through this kind of philosophical lens, drawing on ideas like Kant's interpretation of Aristotle about true friendship, based on equality, selfless love for your friend as a sort of second self.
Wow.
It reflects the shared cultural belief that real friendship was about deep spiritual and emotional alignment, not just, having things in common or convenience.
And the letters were how you tended to that alignment.
Exactly, how you maintained and deepened it when you couldn't be physically present.
What's so striking, though, is how these intensely personal, emotional letters were directly linked to your social standing, your influence. It wasn't just who you knew, but the depth of that connection shown through these letters that seemed to matter so much. How did that work?
Precisely. I mean, yes, the letters were definitely a vital emotional outlet. They offered, as the source puts it, mediated relief for their longing for others, a safe space for private feelings.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But crucially, the source also notes they were strategically deployed.
Oh, okay. So there was a practical side, too.
Yes, deployed to boost their political and professional profiles and even alter their relationship to power and politics. The regular flow of news in these letters, personal stuff, shared interests, observations, it also worked to dispel worries among old allies. It showed you were still connected, still reliable, still part of the trusted network.
So the personal trust, the emotional intimacy built through letters that actually underpin their public credibility.
Exactly. It was this sophisticated dance where genuine affection, shared values, and intellectual closeness directly reinforced your standing and influence. The personal was political and social in a very fundamental way. Trust flowed from real connection.
Okay, so letters were crucial. But beyond the written word, what else did they do to cultivate these deep connections? What other sort of habits or interactions really cemented these bonds in their everyday lives?
Well, face-to-face meetings, when possible, and shared experiences were also incredibly important. They cemented what the letters then sustained. The source gives the example of couples like the Dunkers and the Mathis undertaking quite extensive travels together, journeys through places like Bavaria, Karlsruhe, Mannheim, Switzerland.
These weren't quick trips, were they?
No, often extended periods spent together, intensive interaction, sharing daily life for a while.
And wasn't just tourism, was it? It sounds like it was deeply about relationship building.
Hmm.
Charlotte Dunker, again, she noted that after a year of that kind of shared travel, the vitality and intimacy of those relationships lasted until death.
That's powerful.
It really is.
And Carl Matthey, he wrote to his wife about these visits, saying, "We speak of our love, our experiences, of our important plans and expectations." You can hear the breadth of it. It wasn't just shop talk, it was everything, deeply personal. And that very willingness to share everything, not just hopes, but anxieties, vulnerabilities, that was key. Providing that emotional connection based on shared experiences, whether those experiences were intellectual discussions, personal struggles, or just navigating the world together, it helped fight off that longing and loneliness. It really shows how these friendships served fundamental human needs. They were the main support system, offering vital emotional and psychological backup in a time when communication was slow and life could feel quite isolating sometimes.
You can almost feel the relief, can't you? Finally getting that letter or meeting that friend who truly gets you.
Absolutely.
So thinking about all this, when we look back now and we learn that later editors sometimes cut out what they thought was just irrelevant gossip or personal information from these letters, what does our deep dive suggest they might have completely missed?
Oh, they missed something crucial. Our source is very clear on this. It states that the relevant political information was not entirely comprehensible to contemporaries without the pages upon pages of everyday and extraordinary expressions of feeling.
Wow. So the feelings weren't fluff, they were part of the meaning.
Exactly. It powerfully underlines that for these people, the personal and the public, the emotional and the influential, were not separate things at all. They were woven together. Cultivating these deep, intimate relationships through patient letter writing, through shared life, that was their fundamental way of navigating the world. It was how they built trust, established influence, and really found their place. Their personal connections were, in many ways, their greatest asset.
So what we've really seen today is just how incredibly important cultivating these deep personal relationships was. Often powered by the simple yet profound handwritten letter, shaping not just individual happiness, but fundamentally shaping social status and influence in that era.
And it really does make you think, doesn't it? When you consider the huge emphasis they placed on authentic emotion, on a careful cultivation of bonds in those letters. What does that say about our communication today? Our lightning fast, often super brief digital messages. Does the speed, the ease even allow for that same depth of cultivation, that same slow burn of intimacy? Or are we perhaps sacrificing something really fundamental about connection and maybe even about establishing genuine standing in our rush?
That's definitely something to mull over next time you're typing out a quick message. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.